video is Learning Targets 14 and 15, talking about shared evolutionary relationships. And so in this video, we're going to look at how variation is created, and then we're going to look at how we see evidence of shared relationships in species today. And so one of the main ways that variation is created is through sexual reproduction. Because in sexual reproduction, the resultant organism is a combination of two different genomes. In asexual reproduction, you have just one organism making a clone of itself. It's identical to the parents. Whereas in sexual reproduction, you have a mixture of both parents, and so you have a unique or a nearly unique organism. And so this is going to create variation over time. Another way that variation can occur is through mutations. And again, a mutation is a change in the DNA. And a mutation can cause variation by changing particular physical characteristics, either for the good or the bad. A mutation in a somatic cell, like a body cell, like a skin cell or nerve or muscle or something like that, can cause localized changes, maybe just to the part of the body, so it wouldn't cause major changes. And that particular mutation can't be passed on because, well, it's just part of the body. Well, a mutation to a gamete cell, like a sperm or an egg cell, can cause changes that affect the entire body, and those mutations can be passed on to the next generation. So these are the mutations that are actually going to have an effect long term. Another type of variation, particularly found in plants, is called polyploidy. And this is when an organism has an extra set of chromosomes, typically because of some problem like non-disjunction in meiosis. And so when two plants reproduce, the resultant offspring may have more chromosomes than either one of the parents. And so here you see these two versions of wild wheat. And so normally that each one of those would produce what, 14, a haploid cell of 14 and a haploid cell of 20. And you see this resultant hybrid here, with 21, 14, and 7. Well, in this case, those chromosome numbers have been doubled because of non-disjunction. The chromosomes didn't let go, and so like they should, in humans, this causes a condition like Down syndrome, which is a not a normal condition in humans and can be difficult, and in most cases where non-disjunction occurs, it can be fatal. Well, in plants, for instance, it creates bread wheat, which is a hardier version than the two wild wheats there. And so in plants, this can be a good thing. And again, this leads to variation in populations. You see this in plants quite a bit. And so now we're going to look at some different things that point to shared relationships in populations. I think one of those is geology. We see the layers of rocks, and they represent the passage of time. Older rocks being deeper down, younger rocks being higher towards the surface. And so fossils from earlier ages can then be compared to fossils of today, and you can see the shared relationships between the two. Here's a picture of the Grand Canyon, and there's definite layers in the Grand Canyon. If you've ever been, you can see those layers there, and it kind of shows that on the right-hand picture. And by digging deep down, you can see organisms that lived in the Grand Canyon many thousands of years ago, whereas towards the top, ones that live today. And then you can compare those, and you can link and see the link between those fossils. Biochemistry. Organisms with similar biochemistry share a similar ancestry. We've talked about this before. The more dissimilar two organisms are in their biochemistry, the more distantly related they are. So here are some amino acids that we find in humans. Well, all of these amino acids may not be found in some lower life forms. And so you can tell the difference, or you can see the relationships and the distance of those relationships. Say, for instance, like bacteria, well, we're going to share many more amino acids with a chimpanzee than we do with bacteria or fish or a frog or whatever. And so that's just one example of that. Embryology is another one, and development. Organisms that are closely related will have similar embryos, and they will develop very similarly. We've talked about this as an evidence of evolution as well. And so again, we've seen this picture. The more closely related two organisms are, the more similar their embryos are going to be, the more similar their development is going to be. Comparative anatomy. These organisms with similar anatomy are going to have similar ancestry. We've talked about this with homologous structures, and you see here the different vertebrate forearms that are the horse and the cat and the human, all similar in their shape, not necessarily in their function, but similar in their anatomy, even with the muscles. And as the anatomy becomes more differentiated, organisms share less ancestry. Comparative physiology, very similar. Physiology is not the parts of the body, but how the body works. And so organisms with similar physiology are going to have similar ancestry. Here we have a picture of, looks like some metabolism and thyroid and pituitary, basically just the endocrine system of these organisms. Well, we're going to have a more similar endocrine system with fish than we do with these early fish or lampreys, and then even more so with very early protochordates like Amphioxus and some other really earlier organisms. As processes in different organisms differ to a greater degree, those organisms are going to share less ancestry. Human kidney has similar functions to a primate kidney, for instance, but shares less similar functions with that of a fish kidney. So you can kind of think of it that way. Well, we show these similar relationships on something called a cladogram, and this is something that we've looked at before. And this is a diagram that classifies organisms according to their evolutionary relationships. The cladogram shows different derived characters, and these are characteristics that are shared by the most recent common ancestors. And so, for instance, this derived character, I'll just pick one, claws and nails, they are shared by the most recent common ancestor. Lizards and mice share them, but lizards and salamanders don't, because salamanders don't have claws and nails. They just have kind of fleshy fingers. All right, and then every cladogram is usually going to have an outgroup, which has none of those derived characteristics, or just one of them. This is the most primitive group on the map, and this usually serves as a reference in determining evolutionary relationships. Usually, again, contains none or maybe just one of those derived characters.